Hello and welcome back to our latest episode of Cocktail Party Politics. We have a big, beautiful topic to talk about, Jordan, don't we?
We do. So, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it has cleared the United States Senate in a big win for President Trump in a vote of 51 to 50. So we did have three GOP defectors, Senator Susan Collins, Rand Paul, and Tom Tillis. Rand Paul we knew was going to be a no from the very beginning.
So long as the debt ceiling provisions were included, there was never a chance that he was going to vote on this.
But anyway, this was a huge win for President Trump with passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Now, it does have to go back to the House to be voted on again before it can get to the president's desk for his signature, and that's because the Senate bill made significant changes to the House-passed version of the bill. And the chief among those changes was it made the Medicaid reforms that were included in the House-passed bill a little less generous, as did it made less generous the rollback of the clean energy tax credits. But good news on the tax front is that the bill does include an extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, so we can all breathe a sigh of relief because we all will not be facing a massive tax increase at the end of this year.
It also includes a lot of the president's campaign promise tax provisions, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. These were really important things to the president's economic agenda during his campaign, and are things that voters were really hoping he would fulfill that promise, and it looks like he is.
Yes.
Which is exciting.
Now the bill is back in the House for consideration. They are still hoping to get it over the finish line by the self-imposed July 4th deadline, so President Trump can hold what one can only suspect will be an epic signing ceremony. But there are some hurdles. You know, people in the House have expressed dissatisfaction with the bill that they've received. They were very disappointed in the fact that a lot of the Medicaid reforms were rolled back, and the green energy tax credits, the rolling back of those was made a little less generous. So this is, at this recording, you know, it is far from done. I'm optimistic. I think they're going to get it done.
I think they're going to pull it through.
Yeah, President Trump is working the phones. He's had some of the holdouts come to the White House to discuss with them to get them to a yes. Speaker Mike Johnson, Leader Scalise, they are making an earnest effort to get the votes that they need to get this thing done, and I think they're going to do it. I think we could see a vote on this, and I think we could see it get to the president's desk by the July 4th, and I think that would be, I think that would be an epic way to start the 4th of July weekend. And I think
it really is all hands on deck to get this on his desk by tomorrow, but I have all the confidence in the House and Senate Republicans to push this forward. Now, the CBO released their scoring of the bill, and I think they estimated it would add about $3.4 trillion to deficits. But it's worth remembering that CBO scoring, they don't factor in, I think as we talked about a few weeks ago, all of the economic benefits of this bill that would offset a decent chunk of those deficit increases.
Yes, and we're also it's not incorporating the effects that President Trump's tariffs are having. So there's a lot of things the CBO doesn't account for in its scoring. So I think creates a distorted picture of what this bill would actually do.
We don't actually know the extent to which it would cost the debt, and it's a much rosier picture than the CBO scores would have you believe.
Yeah, so I take what CBO is saying with a grain of salt, because I think as we saw with TCJA, in a lot of respects, CBO got it wrong with what it was projecting TCJA was going to do.
They had a nearly apocalyptic, if any of you remember back in 2017, projection of economic cataclysm from what ultimately were incredibly effective, very useful both for the American economy more broadly and for who makes up the American economy, you know, households and families.
Exactly.
This was so important, and it's amazing that these tax provisions are finally being made more permanent. So
because not making them permanent would spell economic catastrophe. I mean, you're talking about a $4 trillion tax increase on 2/3 of American households. I mean, that would be catastrophic.
That would so profoundly hamper both those 2/3 of American households who would be negatively impacted by this, but also that's a lot of money that they can't spend in the economy. Therefore, profoundly harming our economy.
Exactly. But, needless to say, we'll be watching. I think it's going to get through.
I do too.
I think it's going to be tight. I think there's going to be a little bit of last-minute wrangling to get those few holdouts over the finish line, but I think this thing gets done, and I think we'll all be able to celebrate the passage of this historic landmark piece of legislation this weekend.
I have confidence in President Trump. I have confidence in Johnson and Scalise and the other Republicans in the House and Senate. I think that they're going to make it work, because these are the provisions that won Trump his landslide election, at least on the domestic policy
And you
front.
can make the point that all Republican members in the House rode on Trump's coattails because they were all up for re-election. So they all have him to thank for, in a sense, for why they continue to represent.
This is the first Republican popular vote win in decades. And this was such a big win. He has such a mandate, and policies like the no tax on tips, like the no tax on overtime, like restoring the TCJA were a big part of what he won on. And so it's really important that these get done, and it's wonderful that we're so close.
Yes, and one other point I would make is that I think it was harder to get it through the Senate because I think President Trump has a better hold on the Republican conference in the House, so he can more easily sway them. He wields greater power with them than he does so in the Senate. So I think, yes, there's going to be a lot of last-minute wrangling, but I think we ultimately do get to yes. I think President Trump will prevail. I think he will get the holdouts too.
He just has far more allies, and not just if we're talking about allies, a lot more people in the House, because they all had to run in 2024. They all owe him in a way that the Senate doesn't to the same extent. And that loyalty matters. Those favors that you can cash in Washington, they matter.
Exactly.
Okay, so Jordan, this one big beautiful bill really does live up to its name. It is quite the mega bill. I think it took the Senate readers 15 hours to get through the whole thing.
Yes, it is 887 pages.
Goodness gracious, that is long. Now, there are a lot of various policy things in this 887-page bill. Are there any that are particularly interesting to you?
Yes, I like the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime pay.
I like those too.
Yes, and I like them particularly because they are geared towards the working class.
Yeah.
And I think that President Trump has done a fantastic job of transforming the Republican Party into the party of the working class. The forgotten men and women of this country, he really brought them into the fold and built this huge movement around that. And, the Republican Party is, in a sense, still the Republican Party of 20 years ago, where it does champion big business, but it also champions the working class. And I think that President Trump really tapped into that coalition that for so long the Democrats just assumed that they had, and they didn't have to do anything to keep them in their fold. And President Trump was like, no. I see you. I want to lift you up. I want to do things that'll help you grow in this country and continue to be able to realize the American dream. And I think that he's done that. And it's awesome to see that those provisions, those policies that he championed on the campaign trail reflected in this bill. President Trump says all the time, promises made, promises kept. And I think this is an example of that.
Oh, absolutely. He really did broaden the coalition that could include what a Republican is so different than it is 20 years ago. Yes, we still care about the economy. Yes, we still care about helping economic growth and helping businesses. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act also included really favorable corporate taxes that are going to be continued through this one big beautiful bill. But he's also working a lot with labor and making sure that people are, all Americans are really represented by Republican economic policies.
100%. All right, so I love no tax on tips and no tax on overtime pay in this bill. How about you, Paulina? What sticks out to you?
Well, when you mentioned promises made, promises kept, I was thinking of President Trump being the most pro-life president. He self-describes himself as
100%.
that. And the Senate's version of his one big beautiful bill involves some excellent provisions to defund Planned Parenthood further. The bill is not allowing Medicaid funding to go to Planned Parenthood for a year. Now, initial drafts of this were a little bit stronger. They had this funding ban last for 10 years, but unfortunately the Senate parliamentarian nixed that, which is disappointing, but 1 year is definitely better than nothing.
None. Yep.
President Trump has been the most pro-life president that we have seen in a long time by putting very clear constitutionalist justices on the Supreme Court. That allowed for a few years later that challenge to Roe v. Wade happen, which was really beautiful, the Dobbs decision. And then just recently, I think last week, the Supreme Court upheld a South Carolina law that would allow states on the individual level to not allow Medicaid funding to go to any Planned Parenthood service. It's already Medicaid already can't be used for abortions at Planned Parenthood because of something called the Hyde Amendment, law from a long time ago that was, if anyone remembers, very controversial in the 2020 Democratic primary because it used to be supported very fervently and passionately as one of his key political issues by one Joe Biden. Of course, Joe Biden only believes what Joe Biden is told to believe that day, so shockingly he walked back his support on something that had been a political North Star of his, but that is a law that is still in the books that does not allow for Medicaid money to be, any federal money to be used for abortion specifically, but Medicaid was still being able to be used for other Planned Parenthood services, and since Planned Parenthood makes the vast majority of its profits through abortion, and you are still funding the abortion even if it's a little more obliquely. So these are really great provisions, and they pair so nicely with the South Carolina Supreme Court decision for South Carolina's law, and I'm really hopeful about what this means for the future.
Yes, I mean, that's great, and I just, like we said before, this is a great bill.
It really is as beautiful as the name.
It is, and fingers crossed that the House does its job, gets it over the finish line, and gets it to President Trump's desk, because this is the landmark piece of legislation that will define his second term in office.
This is such the majority of Trump's economic and domestic policy agenda in one beautiful package. They can get it all done together. How wonderful would that be?
And to get it done on Independence Day, I think that would just be the icing on the cake.
Such beautiful symbolism. This man knows how to be symbolic.
Yes. Anyway, we will be watching with bated breath, and next week, hopefully we'll be able to report back with some good news that this bill has been officially signed into law.
Absolutely. Okay.
All right. So moving away from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we have to talk about the verdict that was handed down in federal court this week. P. Diddy
was found guilty on 2 counts of prostitution, though he was found not guilty on the larger cases of sex trafficking and the RICO violations, racketeering.
Yes, and he was found guilty of prostitution, 2 counts, and each of those carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison, so he's facing up to 20 years in prison.
The judge denied his request for bail as he awaits sentencing, which, based on the fact that he very actively tried to evade law enforcement when he was about to be arrested, seems like a smart move.
Yes, and given the fear that a lot of his alleged victims seem to have of him, I think it's good that he's staying behind bars until he is sentenced. Now, he's facing up to 20 years in prison. He could get anything from probation to the full 20 years in prison. Now, if I may make a parallel to the O.J. Simpson case. So you all know, in the trial of the century, O.J. Simpson was infamously acquitted of the murder of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman. But in the early 2000s, he was convicted of armed robbery and was given what some may argue was a very harsh sentence for that crime, and also what some may argue was retribution for him infamously getting off for those gruesome slayings.
The judge in that case wanted less to punish OJ for the armed robbery and more for the perception that this is a guy who got away with murder he should be in jail for as long as I can keep him in jail.
Yeah, so it's quite possible that with P. Diddy we might see something similar here, that he might be handed that maximum 20-year sentence because he did get off on the two more serious charges, and had he been convicted on the racketeering charge, he would have very well spent the rest of his life behind bars.
I'd be very surprised if he gets anything under either the maximum or very close to the maximum, because along with the sense that he got off more on technicalities than on a lack of guilt, I think there's the sense that this is somebody who has gotten away with bad behavior for years.
Yes.
It's a similar sentiment because there's sort of been a knowingness that this is not somebody who is living the most morally upright life. I don't think a lot of people, at least everyday people, knew the extent of what he was getting up to, but...
Well, LeBron famously told us, ain't no party like a Diddy party.
Yeah, the concept of the depravity and bad behavior, I mean, that video of him abusing his ex-wife has been released.
His ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura.
Thank you.
Yes, who was the impetus for this whole trial.
But that video has been out years before the government finally raided his home. So I think there's kind of the sense that this has been a long time coming, that we probably should have done something sooner, and throwing the book at him would alleviate some of that sense of injustice in a similar way to the sentences ultimately experienced by people like R. Kelly and Harvey Weinstein, where, the book was kind of thrown at them when they couldn't prove all the charges, because there was a sense that we're punishing you for everything you've done, all the things that we couldn't prove but are pretty sure you did, and for our own failure to, give accountability sooner.
Yes, I mean, I think that he's going to end up probably with the max. I think that even though the jury found him not guilty on those more serious charges, I think there's a lot of people out there that disagree with the jury's decision. But I possibly might have seen this coming. I think right after the jury started deliberating on Monday, you had a note come into the judge from the foreman of the jury saying that one of the jurors wasn't going to be able to adhere to the judge's instructions or didn't understand them. And it came out that that juror was had a PhD in, I think, biochemistry or something. So I think that was kind of a telling sign that you saw that coming out of the jury right after deliberation started, that this maybe wasn't going to go in the way that maybe everybody expected or that the feds were hoping.
And RICO for more non-traditional crimes is a trickier case to build to begin with.
I mean, it was designed to go after the mob.
Yeah, it was it's not structured for the types of crimes that Diddy has been found guilty of, or even the crimes that he was accused of. So it's a little bit of a harder circle to square,
For sure.
I think that going forward, we've seen a few RICO cases with these high-profile criminal celebrity types. I think that there's going to soon be either a new type of law having to be looked at to make these types of cases, or a rewriting of what racketeering is to fit with these more nebulous types of crimes that aren't large gangs or mafia types.
Exactly. But anyway, Diddy was found guilty on one charge. He's behind bars. He's awaiting sentencing, and of course we will be following it. And when he finally is sentenced, we will react. And I guess since we are on the topic of true crime, Brian Kohberger, who was accused of the brutal slayings of those innocent University of Idaho students 2.5 years ago, he has pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder, and it was done to spare him the death penalty. He was facing the death penalty if he went to trial. The trial was slated to begin in August, and he was facing the death penalty. So in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table, he agreed to plead guilty to all 4 murders, and he can not appeal his conviction. So he will spend the life behind bars, and I know that there's been some disagreement amongst the family of the victims. Some of them would have liked to have seen this go to trial and him to, face what he's done. But some, are happy that this plea agreement was reached, because now they know now that
the murderer of their children, of their siblings, of their loved ones is going to face charges.
Yes, I mean, he did have to stand before the judge as this whole plea hearing was happening. He did have to stand before the judge. The judge asked him, did you kill murder X? Did you kill murder Y? And he had to say yes. Now, I'm sure the families of these victims maybe would have liked to have heard a little bit more from him, because I think that they, in terms of motive, that this was just basically a yes-no scenario. But he will be spending the rest of his life behind bars.
I completely understand why the families are reacting so negatively, and I think a lot of people following the case are reacting in a similar way, because he put those families through hell for years as this investigation and trial have been pending, and he's only doing it now just before the trial. It's the worst of both worlds. They had to deal with the years of anticipation and dread and the not knowing while they got ready for the trial. But now they're going to lack the catharsis of getting to face this man in court and getting to actually have that experience. And I'm sure for some of them, knowing that the death penalty is off the table is probably not as satisfying.
Exactly.
Knowing that their kids had to die just like 21 years old. These were young people whose lives were just ahead of them. And Brian Kohberger, while he has to spend it behind bars, he gets to live the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And that's probably really unsatisfying for some of the loved ones of these families. I don't know them, I can't speak for them, but I can imagine that knowing that he gets to live when their kids don't, after he, for no reason, savagely murdered 4 people. That can't sit right with everyone.
No. But needless to say, he's pleaded guilty. He hasn't officially been sentenced yet. He will be sentenced towards the end of this month, so I'll be interested to see at his sentencing hearing if any of the victims' families do come forward and read any victim impact statements. I
hope they're given the opportunity to. They deserve a chance, since they were denied it in court, to speak to what this man did to them, how he irrevocably harmed all of these people by taking 4 bright, innocent lives brimming with potential.
For sure. But again, we will be watching that when that comes down at the end of this month, and we will, of course, keep you updated.
Yeah. So there seems to be quite a bit of drama coming out of the Fed, as President Trump has just last night called for Fed Chair Jerome Powell to resign.
Yes, so over the past few weeks, President Trump has been making some rumblings regarding Fed Chairman Powell. President Trump is not happy that the Federal Reserve has made the decision to hold interest rates steady instead of cutting them at their last few meetings, even though inflation is trending towards the Federal Reserve's 2% target for inflation. So President Trump's not happy.
No.
And he would like to see the Fed cut interest rates, and so far it's not doing so. But, the Fed infamously last fall decided to cut interest rates by 50 basis points when inflation was still high. And President Trump is wondering, okay, you did that, but now I have inflation near the target, and you're still holding interest rates constant while, the economy is doing well by all standards.
It does seem, at least to outside observers, as if there might be some bias at play, the Fed being willing to manipulate what they're doing in support of former President Biden's election ambitions, but are not making necessary moves to, support the economy now that Trump is president again.
Yes. So Jay Powell's term does end in May 2026, and the president at that time does have the authority to appoint a new Federal Reserve chair. President Trump had indicated in the past couple weeks that he was going to let Jay Powell ride out his term, and that he was going to name a potential successor as early as maybe late summer, fall.
Just so we can know, who will be riding the ship that Powell
But that seems
has.
to have changed as of late.
Just last night, President Trump took to Truth Social to debut a nickname for Powell called Too Late, and said that he must resign now. Now, this is just coming hours after the head of FHFA, Bill Pulte, called for a federal probe into Powell to investigate his decisions to see if they are, sound economically and or politically motivated. Mm-hmm. Now, the FHFA is the big mortgage regulator. They have a really serious stake in how interest rates are being handled, and they are not remotely satisfied with the job that Powell is doing, because there is this sense that we are so close to the inflation targets that if we ease off now, that we can actually help the housing market, which needs a lot more help. We're not facing sticker shock at the grocery stores anymore. I mean, there hasn't been a think piece on the price of eggs in a while.
No.
The inflation has reached it's so close. You mentioned so close to the 2% target.
And I think gas prices just hit a 4-year low, I saw.
Which is saying something due to the fact that there is a lot of cause for concern due to foreign policy with oil prices.
Yeah.
Prices are not the issue that they were a few months ago. And so now these interest rates are only hurting the housing market without the necessary benefit of combating an inflation crisis that we've already fought.
Yes, I mean, and the Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent, so it is not supposed to make its decisions regarding interest rates based on who is in the White House or what party controls Congress.
Which is why it's so interesting that their decisions seem to be so beneficial to one president and not beneficial to another.
Yes, so President Trump would like to see Jay Powell to go. And there's already been some speculation of, if Jay Powell resigns or, if he does make it through the rest of his term, who President Trump will appoint to take his place.
I've been hearing Scott Bessent, who's currently Treasury Secretary. I've heard his name brought up a lot.
Yes, and he has said himself that he'll do whatever the president would like him to do. I think Scott Bessent is doing an excellent job at Treasury. I think I just saw some data that came out that says he's the most popular Treasury Secretary we've ever had.
He is so good, I think. He's strong. He's great with both his policies and his communication style.
For sure.
He's so good at explaining, what the Treasury is doing. And, of course, he's popular. I mean, President Trump took a disastrous economy with abhorrent inflation, and jobs are great. Inflation is doing really well.
We're making all kinds of deals with other countries regarding our trade policy. I think that a lot of people are probably bluffing because people that thought the president's tariff policy was going to be disastrous are kind of eating crow now because it's turned out to not be the case.
He had brought so many countries who were completely ripping us off on trade to the table. We've seen countries drop their tariffs. We've seen countries make new arrangements, and other countries who haven't yet are willing to come to the table in a way that we just weren't seeing previously. We're finally having an actual fair and decent trade relationships with countries that have kind of been freeloading on the fact that America could afford, but that doesn't mean that the American taxpayers and American consumers should be shouldering the burden for other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, so needless to say, the fundamentals in the economy, inflation's inching towards the target, not on the brink of a recession as some people thought we would be. That all suggests that Chairman Powell should be taking steps to lower the benchmark interest rate, and we haven't seen that. So I can understand, why people think this is being done for political purposes instead of being purely independent and not being influenced by any external factors. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if Jay Powell resigns, if he rides out the rest of his term, if President Trump fires him. But I would say at this point, I think Secretary Bessent is probably the likely next chairman of the Federal Reserve.
Especially if Powell resigns early, as President Trump clearly wants him to. He said as much. Yeah. I think that Bessent would be both the obvious and the right choice.
Correct. But again, only time will tell.
Only time will tell. We'll see how Powell responds. So to close off, I think we should talk about some devastating news out of New York City.
Yes, the Democratic mayoral primary. Andrew Cuomo was defeated by
Democratic Socialist candidate Zohran Mamdani.
Yes, and I think that if he gets elected to the mayoral position in November, that'll be the end of New York City as we know it.
The New York City Democratic mayoral primary used ranked choice voting rather than our typical majority rules. This allows voters to rank which candidates they want and give a number rating for multiple candidates. And the idea is technically so that people don't have to choose whatever compromise candidate they feel like they ought to vote for, but instead can vote with their hearts. But it does allow for a lot of extreme candidates to slip through, as primary voters are typically a little more partisan and far to either side than your general voters. And that really proved true because Zohran Mamdani is an avowed socialist who went with the tried and true Democrat campaign policy of just promising a lot of free things to New Yorkers.
Yes, and he also promised to defund the police. Apparently he wants to get rid of billionaires, which I don't really know how you do that.
He wants to raise the corporate tax rate to 11.5%. While he claims that this would dramatically increase revenues, I actually do agree with him. It will dramatically increase revenues.
For other states.
For other states.
Because businesses will flee.
There is no way that businesses are going to stand for an 11.5% corporate tax rate. It's absurd. He also wants to raise personal tax rates on people making above a certain amount. We saw this between COVID and other parts of the Biden administration. When tax situations get too unwieldy, the wealthy people do end up fleeing. People who can leave states are leaving them. California saw this in droves, and New York, to a lesser extent, saw this. And this is just going to severely worsen if he wins the general.
Mm-hmm.
He also has a lot of, in his, promise people free things for votes. He's offered things like free busing and rent freezes.
But I could only imagine what the free busing thing would do. I think buses would become laden with crime, just like the New York subway system is.
The New York subway is so unsafe. I mean, I don't know if anyone could forget that horrific video of the woman being burned alive after sleeping on the subway. Imagine what the bus would be like.
Yes.
If it's free with the crime already in New York. He also is very pro illegal immigration. This is somebody who has been outspokenly critical against President Trump's ICE crackdowns in states like California, which means that all of that great crime that has been plaguing our nation would be even worse if, as he tried to fight tooth and nail in that city, even more so than they already have been. Eric Adams, the current mayor of New York, has been working with President Trump to clean up some of the crime in New York. And Mamdani would just take them entirely in the wrong direction.
Yes, I mean, in terms of crime, also he wants to defund the police.
Yeah. He wants to severely slash their budgets, cut overtime pay, and replace a lot of their services by creating a separate department to deal with what he's deeming as mental health crises, which would make sense if you're talking about like a welfare check or somebody who is wanting to hurt themselves. But a lot of these so-called mental health crises are people in severe states with severe mental illnesses being dangerous to themselves and others. And you need a certain degree of force to be allowed.
Yes.
Because we cannot let the word mental health be used to shield people who are hurting people. I mean, last year that man, Jordan that brave Daniel Penny had to unfortunately save a subway full of people from, the left's line of what he was having was a mental health crisis. But he was putting every person in that subway at risk under that alleged mental health crisis. So apparently, Zohran Mamdani thinks that is not something that the police should be able to get involved in, and instead glorified social workers should be called to save lives in that circumstance. Great plan.
Yeah, needless to say, if this guy gets in, I think New York City will be a crime free-for-all.
it'll be back to the pre-Giuliani days of profound danger, dirty, crime-infested, unlivable.
And he's also a raging anti-Semite.
Oh, completely. I mean,
he was on Meet the Press with Kristen Welker on Sunday, and she tried to get him to, what's that phrase again?
He said that he thinks they should globalize the Intifada.
Yeah.
Which is not just support of Palestine or even criticism of Israel. It's a call for genocide against Jewish people.
Yes, and she tried to get him, I think it was 3 times during that broadcast, to denounce that, and he refused.
He refused. This is not... It's excessive, the degree of anti-Semitism, the degree of lack of awareness for crime. And this is not somebody who, this is somebody who's very insulated. We've talked about this quite a bit, how these politicians are insulated from the harms of their own crime policies.
Because they choose to live as far away from it as possible.
Zohran Mamdani is the son of a film director and a college professor. He comes from a very...
insane amount of privilege.
Yeah. He will not have to face the crime. He will not be on these buses.
No.
He will not be in proximity to the crime that this,
that his policy
defunding of the police, that his support of illegal immigration. He won't have to face the problems of these policies. He will be safe. It is the people that he is trying to lead. They'll be the ones who have to face the consequences of his terrible policies, while he, who's never been in a situation where he's had to face these problems, will continue to be safe and continue to not have to face the consequences. It's just all the New Yorkers who will have to. And New York is a beautiful city.
It's one of the greatest cities in the world.
The greatest cities in the world. There's a reason that film and literature have such a romance with it. There's so much history and life and culture there. And it's a shame to see that this man could truly push it back.
Well, hopefully, between now and the election in November, as more information gets put out there and this guy's true colors are unearthed, New Yorkers will smarten up and they will elect somebody else to be the next mayor.
I mean, Adams is going to run as an independent,
yes.
And there's talk that Cuomo is going to run as an independent, although if Cuomo does run as an independent, there's a severe risk that the two of them split the non-socialist vote, allowing Mamdani to sweep. But we can just hope that one of the two of them is able to make this work, to save a beautiful city that deserves so much better.
Yes. One can hope. And we, of course, will be watching.
We'll be keeping you updated as this goes on. And I think that's our show.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Cocktail Party Politics.
We're so glad you are here to listen to us in and out of the Beltway.
Yes, and we hope you have a great 4th of July weekend.
Happy Independence Day.
Yes, and
be sure to celebrate the greatest country on earth.
Yes, and hopefully we will also be able to celebrate the passage of the one big, beautiful bill.
But whatever happens, we'll be here next week. We cannot wait to talk to you again.
Cheers.
Cheers. Good night.